That fun music always just fills me with joy because it means that it's yet another time for us to sit down, grab a coffee, chillax for a little bit, as the young'uns say these days. By the way, every high school student I have had in the past few years is cringing right now, whether they heard that or not. They're face-palming. At any rate, that music means it's time for the Gracious Guest Show. And I'm your host, Mike Kreeft, host of the Gracious Guest Show. And it's interesting because I'm your host and I'm also your guest in a way, because wherever you are, whatever you're doing, you have just, for whatever reason, decided to be so kind as to welcome me into your mobile device, your web browser, whatever it might be. However you listen to this program, you have tuned in to the Gracious Guest Show, the show where we contemplate, wonder, marvel. In a sense, it's always a little bit like The Wizard of Oz, you know, at the end. Spoiler alert, if you haven't seen it, it came out in, I think, 1939, so hopefully you've seen The Wizard of Oz by now. But, you know, and all the big build-up when they're, you know, meeting with the wizard, and all of a sudden we see that curtain get pulled away a little bit by Toto, and we see what's really going on behind the curtain. Now, I mean, don't take that the wrong way. What I'm not saying is that when we really get behind the scenes of life and you know, the human experience, that we find just some dude, you know, kind of pulling levers and stuff. There's a lot more to God than that. Okay, but what I'm really interested in sort of exploring on this show is how we can, you know, maybe at least take a crack at, you know, when we read books, when we watch movies, watch TV shows, you know, have certain life experiences, we get a little taste of something we can't quite describe, something other, like maybe call it otherness, you know, the idea, not just the idea, but rather the perception of ultimate reality, our source, our summit, you know, and especially for those of us coming from a faith background, in my case, you know, very particularly with the Catholic faith, you know, the Christian disposition, that we see connections with God, you know, the places where God is trying to draw us into a deeper sense of relationship with Him through sometimes the most mundane and ordinary things. Because He knows how we are. He made us. He knows how fickle we can be. He knows how simple we can be, you know, and I think He wants to meet us in precisely those places that sometimes we overlook or ignore. So, without further ado, we're going to jump in today to, as no doubt you saw, I'm picking up Star Wars yet again. And this is, we're already into the mid-50s now of episodes on the Gracious Guest Show, but if memory serves, I looked this up the other day, I believe I did the Star Wars. I've done some episodes where I've speculated a little bit or kind of entertained some ideas about upcoming movies in the Star Wars franchise. That's not what this is today so much, but I think episode 18, I want to say, of this show dealt with the theme of temptation in Star Wars, and then episode 38, I believe, was the most recent one I did on Star Wars, and that dealt more with Advent and Star Wars, which was almost a year ago already, if you can believe that. So I'm recording this now in right before Thanksgiving 2018, and yeah, Advent's right around the corner. So anyways, if you want to go back and check those shows out, if you're into Star Wars and other potential connections that relate to the grander scheme of things, you know, and Christian faith, too, in a particular way, you might want to go check those episodes out. So, without further ado, I'm jumping right into this theme, or these themes, rather, I should say, and they're related, and that namely has to deal with identity and purpose. The themes of identity and purpose. You know, how do you know who you are and what you're for, in a sense, or what your place is, you know, in life and the climate you find yourself, you know, that kind of thing. The challenges that come up in life and you know, more particularly in Star Wars, because it's, you know, it's fiction. You know, we can look at the role of identity and purpose within a story, and how characters come to realize within that story who they are. Now, that's a huge topic. I mean, we could go on that forever. I'm just going to highlight one character from each of the trilogy movies. So just letting you know up front, I'm going to kind of bracket off, for the purposes of today's little musing, I'm going to bracket off anything that's like in the Legends, which used to be called the Expanded Universe, any of the novels and other, comics, those kinds of things. I'm bracketing that off. I know some of those. I mean, I don't follow all of it. I'm primarily I'm a huge Star Wars fan, primarily of the movies in my case. I'm also bracketing off like Clone Wars or Rebels, any of the, and quite frankly, some of the spin-off movies as well, like Solo and Rogue One. So I may mention them, in passing, basically, but I'm really focused here today on, just my thoughts. You can agree to disagree or just flat out disagree. And we can have a discussion, through different channels if you want to kind of pick this up. So feel free to email me over at thegraciousguest@gmail.com. That's always a good way to get in touch with me. On social media, it's @gracious_guest. And I'm also on Facebook now. I have a Facebook page for The Gracious Guest. So any number of ways you can get in touch with me. I'd love to get some feedback from the show in general, this show in particular, and hear your thoughts on my take here on some of this. So before we get officially started, I want to do something I've not done in a long time. And if you're new to the show, I must admit I don't remember off the top of my head the last time I did this, but there's a segment that I do, not necessarily every episode, but every now and then. I like to check in with our official Gracious Guest show field correspondent, my daughter Noelle. And Noelle she'll be 2 in a few weeks, and she's not always the easiest to understand, but she's getting more and more easy to understand. And every now and then I like to go to Noelle and just ask her, for a quick little, check-in on what's going on in her world, and sort of how she perceives things. So without further ado, let's go ahead and check in with the Gracious Guest Show's official field correspondent, my almost 2-year-old daughter, Noelle Kreeft. Check it out. Now, Noelle, I was just talking to you earlier about philosophy, right? Were we talking about philosophy?
Yeah.
So I asked you before, are you familiar with the principle of non-contradiction?
Yeah.
Yeah, right? So X cannot be both X and not X at the same time. Is that right?
I see.
Yeah, you can see. So why don't you tell me a little bit about your experience with philosophy? Yeah. Yeah.
I'm on the radio.
Oh, are you on a podcast?
Yeah.
Can you say podcast?
Burger.
Very good. Do you know what this podcast is about today? It's not about philosophy, actually, so much. Do you know do you like Star Wars? You like Star Wars? Remember how we watch Star Wars sometimes? Yeah, what happens on Star Wars?
BB-8.
BB-8, that's very good. Right, and you like BB-8?
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you build BB-8?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're the one who came up with the idea?
BB-8.
That's fair. Yeah. Well, that's very interesting. Well, Noelle, we're going to get going. Okay, so can you say bye-bye?
Bye-bye.
And say take care.
Take care.
And can you say don't forget to wonder?
And get a water.
Very good. Okay. Thank you, Noelle. Isn't she great? Quite frankly, I mean, this show, typically the format is, if you've never tuned in before, that, I just sort of muse about something, maybe share some resources. And so I've done different programs in the past, and I also I host a youth and young adult themed topical kind of conversation show for a local Catholic radio station here in the greater Harrisburg, Pennsylvania area. And so, I've done a couple different things. I don't do a whole lot of live stuff, haven't done that much, but there's different formats, obviously, for programs like this. But this particular program is, in my mind, it kind of generated as something that could just be something a little different, something different than you might hear certainly on a lot of different radio programs or, different podcasts that are out there. While I definitely share a lot in common, I think, with other folks who are pursuing kind of the faith and culture discussions. My hope is that this show has a variety, and it's relatively short. It's something you can listen to on your commute, So when you go back and look at previous episodes of the Gracious Guest Show, which I highly recommend you do, if you just go to my website, thegraciousguest.org, you can get the link there to the podcast and look at previous episodes. I'd say the average time length on them is probably around 20 minutes, maybe a little less. I've had a couple shows that have gone over a half hour, but they were just kind of bigger topics, and I really kind of needed to cover them, and I didn't really want to split it into 2 episodes. And then there are other ones where there is a topic where I know it's going to, eat up more time than that, so I do deliberately split it into 2 topics. Or ones like this, where it's like an overarching topic that is recurring, or I'll come back to it and, look at different themes in Star Wars, that kind of thing in this case. So, so that's just a little bit about the show if you've never listened to it before. So, I invite you to go and check it out. So, back to Star Wars, Identity and Purpose. And like I said, I just wanted to pluck, sort of arbitrarily pluck 3 characters, one from each of the main trilogies in the Skywalker saga and the movies. And just highlight a few things that have come to me the more I've watched these movies and as a big fan over the years. And then as I've grown in my Catholic faith, seeing certain things that resonate and a lot of times that I didn't expect to see that jump out at me, whether or not it was intended when they were creating these movies, when George Lucas and then now the newer writers like Rian Johnson and J.J. Abrams, Chris Terrio, Lawrence Kasdan, like all the different people involved in the screenwriting on these films, whether or not they intended to put it there, that's not the point. One of the things I hold deepest is that God works in mysterious ways behind the scenes, sometimes without us even really knowing it. So I have no doubt whatsoever that the Lord himself, in some ways, is of course capable of prompting and inspiring people who might be just thinking they're doing something totally secular, but there's some sort of resonating echo of creation, echo of something that God has said somewhere in history that kind of comes through, and if you have ears to hear it, it can hit you in a powerful way. So with that in mind, identity, purpose, who are we? Who am I? These are huge questions every one of us faces, and we see a lot of struggle in our current society, especially with that question taking on whole new dimensions, that are very troubling, quite frankly. Very, they don't bring any clarity to the question. They only seem to confuse it more. And it's just this crisis, in a lot of ways over this question. And it's a very important question. I love the scene. I've mentioned this before. The scene at the end of, I think, the first Amazing Spider-Man movie with Andrew Garfield, where Andrew Garfield, Emma Stone, who else? Willem Dafoe. Whoops. I'm getting my Spider-Man sagas mixed up. Go easy on me, it happens. Not Willem Dafoe. It's who was it? I'm losing his name now. Who played Emma Stone's dad? Was it Dennis Leary? I think maybe. I'll have to go back and check. But yeah, Amazing Spider-Man, like 2012. In that one, at the end of the movie, where Peter comes in late to English class, and that's sort of just the context for it. But the teacher is saying something when he walks in. It's very, very important, I think. And she's talking about, this segment they're going to begin, this section of their class, a new unit where they're discussing literature, and she mentions how, different people have, made different suggestions or made different claims about how many total kinds of plot, like fundamental storyline plots are possible, looking at all of human literature. And she says, some people will say it's 5, some people say it's 8, some people say it's 3. Like in terms of fundamental plots you really have at the end of the day, no matter what the overall story is. At the core of it, like what's going on with the characters in this story. But she says in the scene, she goes, I submit to you that there was only one. Who are you? And I love that. I think that's really, I think she's onto something. That every single story you take, at the core of it, whatever's going on, you can at least make the argument that a very big part of the story, if not the point of the story in a sense, is the characters discovering who they are. Not just what they do, not just what, their job is, or under these circumstances, how they fit, in this particular organization or something like that. But those are all parts of it. But I think we all know there's something deeper. Who are you? There's a great scene in the movie Anger Management like that when Adam Sandler goes in and he sits down. I might have shared this before too, and you might remember the scene. and they're just getting to know each other in the little, anger management group. And Jack Nicholson, who's leading it, asks him, tell us a little bit about yourself, Dave. Who are you? And he's like, oh, my name's, Dave Busnick. I'm a junior executive. And he's, oh, no, Dave, you're describing your profession. No, who are you? He's like, oh, okay, well, and I can't remember everything he says, but it's basically like, I'm a nice guy. And he's like, Dave, you're describing your personality traits. Just, no, who are you? And it's like this frustrating scene where he doesn't know what he's supposed to say because everything he says is wrong, but I think there's something to that too. So we take some of those things and then we look at Star Wars, for example, and you look at a lot of the discussions that are often, sort of entertained about the plot and whether people like it or not, or comparisons to other storylines or, there's a lot of great material out there about the structure of the original Star Wars movies and George Lucas's, personal interest in the work of Joseph Campbell, who did a lot of work on storytelling and archetypes, and he was very Jungian kind of in his approach to the hero's journey and some of the things that just make for a great story, So all of that's there. But, when I look at it, I think what jumps out at me, the more I watch Star Wars, and I would pick 3 characters. Some might seem, they might all be obvious to you that I would pick them. You can do this with others. But the 3 that I was thinking of today are in the prequel trilogy, if we go chronologically here. The prequel trilogy, the character of Anakin Skywalker. In the original trilogy that, chronologically follows, of course, the prequel trilogy, even though it came out a lot earlier than the prequels. I'd like to just point out Han, his character, Han Solo, and then in the sequel trilogy that we're currently 2 installments into at the time of this recording, and we're awaiting episode 9 next year, the character of Rey. And, you could argue that, out of the 3 of them, Darth Vader, Anakin Skywalker is sort of the more central character kind of across all 3 trilogies. So obviously they overlap, and that's not really, anything to worry about here. But just, what jumps out at me about their story arcs with Anakin, of course we see through the prequels, the whole point of it really, the whole point of the prequels, you could argue, is to show us his journey from, being a child, basically, with all this potential and being so force sensitive and being this mysterious character who might be this chosen one, this prophecy fulfilling person who has all this potential for good. But we see, of course, he has all this potential for evil as well. And I talk a lot about that and the temptation specifically for him, and comparing it to the temptations that his grandson Kylo Ren in the new sequels faces in a different episodes. That's the one, if you want to go back, I mentioned episode 18 of this show, goes into that a little bit more. But just looking at identity, like how does he see himself? How does Anakin perceive himself? And he spends a lot of time, especially in episodes 1 and 2, kind of trying to be this iconic Jedi, and he's it's like this sense that he's trying to be the best of the best, and he's struggling with the code, the Jedi code that in one sense tells him, to be at peace and to be content, and he's always struggling with this sort of fire within him, this fury, this yearning for more. And he says that, I think it's episode 2, he's frustrated and he says to Padme, I want more, and I know I shouldn't. And you see the struggle there. Like he's trying to do the right thing, but he keeps feeling this pull. And of course, as you watch all the movies, you see that it's all he's being manipulated the whole time. He's being manipulated by the Emperor, who of course just wants him for his power. Now he doesn't know that, of course, but so there's all these other things going on in the background that are to a greater or lesser degree things he can't necessarily control. But that's his internal struggle, his identity. Like, who is he? Who's he meant to be? What's his purpose? What's his mission? And he's struggling for that. And what really seems to be the catalyst is, in the midst of all of that, his love for his wife. His love for Padme, who he secretly marries. He's not supposed to do that, but, he loves her, and he's got this conflict. And what really, in Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, tips the balance is his growing fear, and he's having those visions. I'm assuming if you're listening to this, you've probably seen these movies. So I'm not going to give a lot of details. He has these visions. He has this deep fear that something's going to happen to her. And then, hey, lo and behold, here comes the Chancellor, who's a eventually going to become the Emperor, we find out, the Chancellor, who just happens to drop a little interesting tidbit to him that he's heard about this ancient Sith Lord who knew how to bring back his loved ones from the dead and to save them from dying. Like, clearly this is all part of the manipulation. Somehow we gather that Chancellor Palpatine is even manipulating Anakin's dreams and visions, to sort of build this fear, So, you make a long story short, and we know what happens. Like, Anakin turns to the dark side in this flash of fury, and it's pitched in Episode 3, filling in the blanks from the original the original movies, but it's the official story is that he did this out of this panic to try to save the one he loved. But it's also all mixed up with pride and thirst for power and all this stuff that sort of turns him then, of course, into this monster. Truly, this Frankenstein-type monster. We won't get into the whole, like, literally him breaking off the table and yelling, "No!" at the end of Episode 3. I hate it, too. Don't worry, just mute it when that happens. You'll be fine. So anyways, then of course, we catch up in the original movies with all that backstory. You see Darth Vader, he's this scourge of the galaxy, he's the most feared and hated man, and he's this iconic movie villain. But here's what I think is so cool. In his story, it was love for his wife that was sort of that's in a sense, the part of him that the Emperor manipulated the most to get him to become evil. But here's the great thing. That's precisely how he is redeemed. So in a sense, where he was weakest, and I'm not saying it's weak to love your wife, but I'm just saying like that, it was that the Emperor used against him. It's as his son is being, fried by the Emperor with the blue lightning and everything, on death's door, that Darth Vader has that iconic, classic conversion experience where he grabs the Emperor and throws him down down the shaft in the Death Star, and he has this return to the light side. Darth Vader's redemption, that he's redeemed through precisely, he achieves his always destined to be identity precisely through the same kind of door that he had entered into the dark side through. I think that's pretty awesome. And I think there's a lot of material for some theological kind of reflection there, quite frankly. That's pretty amazing. When you look at Han, I'll be a little briefer, in the original trilogy, and you see this borne out in Solo as well, which, I liked that movie, but I felt like we didn't need to kind of revisit some of the part of the story arc for the original trilogy was to show you Han deep down as a good guy, so. But that aside, in the original trilogy, when you first meet Han Solo, Harrison Ford's character, he's just this kind of, rough and tough, kind of charming, little goofy, but overconfident, but he is really good at what he does, kind of scoundrel. He's not evil, but he's more of like a pirate kind of guy. He's looking out for his own skin. He's not part of any cause. He's not loyal, and then, of course, through the trilogy, like you see Han battling with that, that's how he's living. That's how he perceives himself. But, as you go on, you see that like the whole time there's a depth there that for whatever reason he's trying to run away from. He's trying to ignore. And like I said, the Solo movie kind of fills some of that in, I think, pretty well. But, there's another thing like identity and purpose. Like, who are you, Han Solo? Oh, I'm an outlaw. There, I said I wouldn't bring Solo up, but he does that. I'm an outlaw. And Kira's like looking at him like, come on, Han. He's like, no, really, I'm serious. I'm a dangerous man. It's like, that's like who he wants to be. That's who he wants to be. And funny enough, you see some of that in his son too, I think, in Kylo, and to a much more, violent, terrifying degree. But I think there's something there for Episode 9 for potential for his redemption. That's just my speculation. We'll see about that. Maybe we'll talk about that in another show. But, Han in the original trilogy, his identity, his purpose. And then what's neat is they bring it up more than in the sequel trilogy as we get Han back in Force Awakens. And I thought that was done well. That you see that, in life, sometimes even after we've had our big, transition, a big revelation, a big boost to our true identity, a coming to grips with who we really are, who we're called to be, that doesn't mean you don't still struggle with it, right? So we see Han is kind of back to his old ways, but he's still himself, though. Like, as much as he tries to run away from the fact that, he's one of the good guys, as Kira says, he really is. He really is, and he gradually comes to embrace that more and more, and to kind of let that through, and to be willing to kind of let the guard down, let the mask down a little bit. And then, last but not least, with Ray, and what I think is really cool about Ray, two things. First of all, is, again, at the time of this recording, we don't really know yet. There's a lot of mystery about her yet. There's a lot of mystery about Ray. What I see when I watch The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi is, it's kind of interesting how within a Star Wars movie now you have almost this like Star Wars fan dimension within the movie. It's almost like Rey is one of us who loves Star Wars and wants to be one of the characters. And they actually play with that in the plot, I think, in a pretty brilliant way. And it's like she's going to be like Luke, or she's going to be like Yoda, or she's going to be like this person or that person, or maybe she's, it's like, yeah, that's what she's doing. Like, she's kind of thinking, oh, I have to be like this way or that way, or, but she doesn't really understand it yet. She doesn't really understand what her role really is. She doesn't really know who she is yet, and that has to be one of, if not the biggest parts of Episode 9, is to finally, sort of explore that and to discover that. And so I think, what do all these story arcs have in common? I think when we look at identity and purpose, we look at the situations in life and our own lives, and you see this in fiction. That's one of the best things about fiction, good fiction, is it's real life in a microcosm. I think I've said this before. Viggo Mortensen, who played Aragorn in the Lord of the Rings movies, when he was asked why people love Lord of the Rings so much, he just said without batting an eye, because it's a true story. And there's a lot of wisdom there. Of course, that doesn't mean that all of the things in the Lord of the Rings movies actually happened out there in the world somewhere. But there's something deeper, like the themes, the characters, the plot, the undercurrent of the story is true to our experience. And in this case, discovering your purpose, discovering your identity, discovering, and that's an important word, not just that you just make yourself whatever you want to be, because we do have free will, and we do definitely have a lot to do with shaping who we are, who we become. But that's not the end of the story, because there's more to us than meets the eye, just like everything else. There's more going on than we can see, as I often say on this show. Marvel, wonder, what's beyond the veil, behind the curtain. What I think is implicit in Star Wars, and in these characters in particular, when we look about this, is they're making their own decisions, they're free agents, they have free will, but clearly there's something more going on. There's destiny. There's destiny, there's some calling, and that's, I think, at the end of the day, a very key thing about identity and purpose in real life and in Star Wars. I don't think identity and purpose, the question of who we are, I don't think you can ever satisfactorily come to an understanding of any kind with that question until you until you recognize that vocation is inseparably part of that. That vocation cannot be broken apart from identity and purpose if we ever want to actually understand who we are. And what do I mean by vocation? It means a calling. Your calling, your destiny. And that implies that there's someone other than you who's calling you. There's another involved in here. And as you watch the story of Anakin, Darth Vader, Han Solo, Rey, all the characters in the Star Wars saga, everywhere they go, everything they face, every issue they fight, all the conflict, what's always in play is that's behind all of it, there's some sense of destiny, that the story is going somewhere, that all these things, even these terrible things, are happening or being allowed, in a sense, right, to happen for some bigger reason that we can't maybe see or understand right now. And I'm a part of that, but I don't really know how I fit in this story. And the best sort of little hint of that, I think, was when Kylo Ren is talking to Rey after that fight in Last Jedi, and he's trying to shoot her down a little bit, He's saying, you're nothing, you're nobody, your parents sold you off for drinking money. We don't know if any of that's actually true yet. He might just be lying to her or trying to, manipulate her. But there's, you see it right there, bluntly, just in the script itself, this idea that this is a story, and, you don't have a part in this story. And he's kind of shooting her down, and then he tries to get her, but but you're nothing, but not to me. And then he's trying to get her to kind of see it his way. But how does he know? He's actually just part of a greater story as well. So those are some themes, for what it's worth. Sorry if it seemed a little rambly. I'd love your input. I'd love to see if you got some take on that, or if you think I'm on to something here. Just a little musing on Last Jedi was in there too, but the Star Wars saga, the episodes 1 through 8, and then a little hinting, my musings, my guessings about 9, and the importance of identity and purpose maybe in our own lives. So maybe after today's episode, you can grab a coffee or a beer or whatever, if you're, of course, legally able to drink, that is, and sit back and, think a little bit about maybe your own story. How do you know who you are? What are you basing that on? Is it just about your job? Is it just about, your sort of, political views or your hobbies, or, just kind of what you're feeling, or is there more to it than that? Maybe at the end of the day, you're not the only one who gets a say in who you are. Maybe someone who loves you infinitely wants to help you figure that out. What a crazy thought, huh? Anyways, this is Mike. The Gracious Guest is at thegraciousguest.org, The Gracious Guest Show. You can find there my blog, presentations I offer to come and give. Like I said, shoot me an email over at thegraciousguest at gmail.com, or look me up on Twitter at gracious_guest. And hope you guys are doing well. Love to hear from you. And until next time, don't forget to wonder. Take care.